and use. Good morning again. Thanks for being here. Use the chat box for questions or raise your hand or chime in verbally as we move through the program. We want this to be interactive as we work through these issues today with our outstanding panel. I'll be introducing them shortly. First, we wanted to go over a few details to set up this conversation and also just provide a brief review of Forefront for folks that aren't as familiar with Forefront, which I understand might be the case. So bear with us if you are while we work through that quickly. We'll go ahead and get started now. So we are recording this event. So if you just joined us, please take note of that and turn off your camera if you prefer not to be on screen. But we invite your faces. It's always nice to have faces. So feel free to chime in as we go through. So I'm going to hand this over to my colleague, Alec, to briefly review and remind you about what Forefront does and the role we play in our state. So Alec, if you would take it away, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm Alec Lapata. I'm Policy and Government Affairs Coordinator here at Forefront. So I work very closely with Holly on all this. So for those of you who might not be super familiar, Forefront, we're the statewide membership alliance for the social impact sector. So all nonprofits and all foundations, all philanthropic advisors. So that's a pretty wide stakeholder group. You can see the longer list of the types of organizations that we represent here on the slide. In terms of our mission, we're seeking to educate, convene, and mobilize the sector statewide. We're really emphasizing that statewide presence at the moment. That's part of our new strategic plan. The other key commitment in our most recent strategic plan was to place racial equity at the center of our work, not as another program, not as just one other thing we do, but as the core driver of everything we do. So that's really sort of at the highest level who Forefront is. In terms of what we do, on the next slide, Holly, we have a lot of different things that we're working on to support our sector and to achieve those goals. So there's things that we do like today where we're providing training, technical assistance, support for the sector on key issues that people face in their work and their day-to-day jobs. We do peer skill sharing where we help connect people with experts one-on-one when they have questions about a particular issue they're facing. We have a really excellent library that helps provide lots of resources for our members as they look to do fundraising, as they look to do research on what's happening in the sector, as they look to do donor prospecting, look for grants, all different kinds of things. We provide fiscal sponsorship. We have member networks that help connect people in specific parts of the sector and help them share best practices. And that's just a couple of things, along with, of course, the public policy and advocacy work that Holly and I do. So Doris is our membership person. You can talk to her if you have questions about any of those and any other benefits that we can provide your nonprofit. In terms of who we are, I think in public policy work, especially the people working on it are important. It's really key to have those relationships and experience in place when you're doing that work. So Holly has had a lot of really great experience both in state government in Massachusetts and Arizona, and then in Illinois working for Illinois Partners for Human Service at United Way in McLean County. So experience in nonprofit and foundation work there that she's able to bring now here. And then I previously worked as a philanthropic consultant working on public-private partnerships and then in Governor Pritzker's office for a year. So between us, we're bringing some really great experience to this work, and we're excited to be advocating on behalf of the sector in DC and Springfield, wherever we're needed. So as I sort of alluded to, our policy program is working at the federal, state, and local level. So we're covering all the bases that might impact our sector. At the federal level, we're working with these key federal partners, so National Council of Nonprofits and United Philanthropy Forum in particular, to advance goals with our partners in other states, so other statewide nonprofit associations and philanthropic associations. The work at the federal level, I think might be on the next slide, so we can talk about, okay, so yeah, so at the federal level, we'll be working on things that are structural, so getting a seat at the table for our sector, as well as census, which is key to really all of our work every day. And then things like tax incentives for charitable giving, which I think we can all agree is really important. We've got a couple, as you can see, moments where we're in DC doing this kind of advocacy, both for the trips for the United Philanthropy Forum and the National Council of Nonprofits for their lobby days, which are coming up later this month, and then in June for the National Council. The Charitable Giving Coalition is a group that we also work very closely with on some of those tax incentives. And then Council on Foundations and Independent Sector are partnered with some of those events as well, and we work with them on some of this really important federal advocacy. At the state level, Holly and I are in Springfield regularly. I don't know if this is on the next slide, Holly. It's hard to remember the order. But so we're in Springfield regularly advocating on behalf of the sector on a wide range of issues that come to us or that we bring to the state legislature. So that includes regulatory things like raising the nonprofit audit threshold so that small nonprofits have a lower audit burden every year, to trying to create a charitable tax incentive at the state level, to a wide range of structural issues like contracting or lobbying rules that really impact the whole sector, regardless of the kind of work you're doing. So we're in Springfield regularly working on that as well. We can move on to the next slide, Holly, I think.
That's all for now on policy.
Oh, that is all for now. Sometimes we have different sets of slides, but so that's a little bit of an overview of what our policy team is doing. I know today we're going to be talking about DAFs and endowments, which have a wide ranging intersection in some of that policy work, and we'll be getting into some of that in the part 2 of this sort of series on DAFs and endowments. And I'll let Holly and our esteemed panel sort of touch on that as well. So I'll pass it back to you, Holly, and we can go from there.
Thanks, Alec. We wanted to provide a brief overview. As he said, we will go in more into our policy agenda as we wrap up, and then in part 2 of this event, which will be later this spring. So I want to take a minute and introduce our wonderful panel this morning, who are all on camera. So I'll start with Julianne or Julie Buck. Julie, would you like to indicate how you'd prefer folks to refer to you today? Would it be Julianne or Julie?
In conversation, Julie is fine.
Okay, thank you. Julie is the executive director of the Community Foundation of Grundy County. And for the past 20 years, Julie's been the first and only executive director of the Community Foundation in Grundy County, taking the foundation's assets from 0 to 15 million. Congratulations. And has ingrained the foundation as a partner throughout the region. GC is in compliance with the national standards for community foundations and has set a 2023 and beyond priority around, first, mental health, and second, children, for their strategic grant making. Throughout her career, Mrs. Buck has served on the boards of a number of nonprofits and professional associations. Most recently, she serves on the board of directors of the Chicago Council on Planned Giving and is the co-chair of GCPG's annual Day of Learning Symposium, which I believe is in May, right, Julie?
Right, May 25th.
So if you're interested in that, you can contact Julie for more information. Julianne teaches a certificate of nonprofit administration at Joliet Junior College and is a member of a 6 consultant team teaching a certificate of chamber and nonprofit leadership via the Kokomo Thriving Center in Indiana Wesleyan University. Next, we have Rose Jagus. Correct me if I mispronounced your name, Rose. Is it?
It's Jagus, but
Jagus,
okay.
thank you. My apologies. Rose Jagus, Senior Philanthropic Advisor from the Jewish United Fund, Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Chicago. Rose has been at the Jewish Federation of Chicago for 22 years, heading the Center for Jewish Philanthropy for the last 13 years, and currently serving as a philanthropic advisor. The center serves thousands of Jewish individuals and families and holds more than 1,030 donor advised funds, which we'll go over today, and supporting foundations with assets of approximately $1.2 billion. The center staff works closely with donors and families to help make their philanthropy effective and meaningful. Rose received a JD from the Chicago Kent College of Law, and before joining the Jewish Federation, Rose practiced employment law and worked in the nonprofit sector, holding a variety of positions. Thanks for being here, Rose. Next, Brittany Kinker, Dr. Kinker, is a co-director of the Donor Advised Fund Research Collaborative, which we're going to talk about towards the end of the program today, and the co-lead researcher for the National Study on Donor Advised Funds. She serves as the principal and owner of Kinker Consulting, LLC. She has more than 15 years of experience in foundations, nonprofits, and higher education. Dr. Kinker is a sought-after expert and advisor to foundations, philanthropy serving organizations, which is Forefront. So PSOs, as we say, philanthropy serving organizations. Forefront is the PSO in Illinois. So Brittany is working with other PSOs in other states like Forefront on her research. She also works with consultants and researchers nationally. Dr. Kinker also leads Ask CMF, answering hundreds of questions every year from grant-making organizations across the state of Michigan and beyond. She is a 2164 certified advisor and facilitator, a full member of the National Network of Consultants to Grant Makers, and holds a board source certificate of nonprofit board consulting. Dr. Kinker received her PhD from the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And finally, Molly Rand. Molly is a senior philanthropic advisor at Chicago Community Trust, where she is responsible for building and nurturing relationships with current and prospective donors. She works with families and individuals to develop philanthropic strategies and support impactful giving, and helps connect philanthropy to opportunity by leveraging the knowledge of the Trust community impact staff for the benefit of donor advisors. A senior nonprofit professional with 30 years of progressive experience in fundraising, consulting, and nonprofit management, Molly joined the Trust in January 2019. She is a chartered advisor in philanthropy as designated by the American College of Financial Services. She is a member of the Chicago Women in Philanthropy, National Center for Family Philanthropy, Women in Development Professions, and the Advancement Network. She graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a degree in journalism. So what a fabulous panel. I'm so excited. Thank you all so much for being here. We pulled this together quickly, so this group gets huge kudos for rallying quickly to make this happen. We're so grateful for your time. And we're going to spend most of the rest of the time together today hearing from our panel. Before we dive in, I just want to kind of set the table by making sure we have some shared language here and shared definitions of the terms that we're going to be covering today before our panel starts to discuss these issues and we go into Q&A. So as we're talking today, we're going to start by having Julie and the others define the terms that you see here and explain how they relate to one another. And just before we dive into the terms, just want to make a quick reminder that there are various types of tax exempt organizations under our federal tax code. So among those, there are differences between charitable operating nonprofits and private foundations. And then among foundations, there are various types of foundations. And so we're going to go through what each of these mean and explain how operating nonprofits can benefit from the different products offered by different types of foundations. And then if you have any questions about any of that or the legal implications, we can cover that as well. So I'm going to put a couple links in chat before we go through the next slide that relate to those points I just made. So among different types of foundations, they operate differently based on where they are located, what their priorities are, and what type of foundation they are. But different foundations may offer different products, such as endowments and donor advised funds, but they may have different ways of managing those products for donors and grantees. And that's permitted. It's okay to do different things as long as they all meet minimum federal guidelines and regulations. So I just want to kind of set the table with that concept, knowing that the different panelists here bring different products and ways of operating to the table. and that's okay. And there's some kind of something for everybody. So that's what we want to make sure you walk away with, is if you're interested in pursuing these development tools, know what they are and how to do that with your locally available resources. So I'm going to first hand it to Julie and ask her to kind of go over these terms. First, by setting the table with how each of these types of institutions vary from one another, and then going back to the terms donor advised funds and endowments to talk about what each of those mean. Go ahead, Julie. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Holly. I also want to do a huge shout out to Forefront's Peer Skill Match program. It's phenomenal. Not because I'm a mentor, but for a nonprofit, they can go through this, identify their need, and Forefront will match them up with an ad hoc mentor. You spend an hour together, and it's a really one-on-one. So if any of you nonprofits have not participated in the Peer Skill Match, I really recommend it. So anyway, types of foundations. So community foundations, obviously I am most familiar. We are 501c3 public charities for the purpose of being a pool of local funds for local grant making. So community foundations are we're only place-based. Corporate foundations, I don't have a whole lot of experience with that, but they're pretty self-explanatory. A corporation chooses to set up a fund, and that foundation, like any other 501c3, we don't pay federal income tax on any of our quote unquote profits. I know a number of corporations that have set up foundations on the side, and they contribute X dollars or percent into that foundation, and then they do grant making. Could be local, could be regional, could be international, whatever the corporation chooses. Family foundations or private foundations pretty much say what they are. They're a single donor fund. We had an estate plan that originally went into a trust, and the IRS declared it a private foundation. And so they were subject to all the IRS regulations. And so that's a big, long story. But family foundations, usually, as it sounds, they take family wealth, they create a foundation, and then the family collectively does their grant making. So it's a great way for a family to practice their, what's the word I'm looking for? It just escaped me. The morals and ethics of that particular family in order to make an impact in the world. Public foundations, I'm gonna skip that and call upon the rest of the gang. And I also don't have any experience with health conversion. So anybody on the panel want to chime in on either of those two?
I can talk a little bit about a health conversion foundation, which is basically, as I understand it, a foundation that can be established when a nonprofit organization, such as a hospital, goes out of business, and a certain amount of that money can end up in what's called a health conversion foundation that then can be used as a foundation to give out money, mostly in the healthcare field. I believe a public foundation, you're talking about a foundation that is partially established by the government. Is that correct?
No,
I'm not so
probably
familiar with
not. A public foundation, most often in the field, is actually a public charity that happens to do grant making. That is actually what that is. A corporate foundation can take multiple forms. It can be in some cases, it's even a DAF, but that can be an internal giving program, or that can be a separate and distinct private foundation that is funded entirely or mostly by a corporation or large entity. And then family foundations, that is one kind of private foundation, as Julie was describing. Those are situations where you have an individual or a small group of individuals who fund that. Does not receive public support. So that is really your difference between a public charity and a private foundation, is the amount of public support. So if you don't have enough public support, you become a private foundation. You're actually a private foundation by default if you don't have enough public support. So that's really the difference.
And I would just add that the word foundation gets sort of bandied about. And it's not
Yeah,
always
most
the-
organizations are not actually foundations, even if it's in their name. It's true. That's a really great point, Rose.
All right,
Um,
thanks.
Just
And
quick-
then,
I was gonna offer one example of a health conversion foundation, since
Okay.
it's more rare. One example in Illinois is the Healthy Communities Foundation that serves the Chicago area. So if you're interested in understanding more about that model, you can look at them.
And
Go
there's the
ahead.
Michael Reese Foundation also, which I believe is a health conversion, was a health conversion one also.
Yeah, and they're in the process, I believe, of becoming a public foundation. So it gets a
Sorry,
little
I
squirrely.
did
Yeah.
already become a public, you're right, I forgot, sorry.
So let me, before we go on, I'll just ask if folks in the room have questions or need more information about the differences here, or if we're ready to move on.
or if they are, some of these were kind of questionable, if anybody in the audience has experienced a health conversion foundation, by all means, put your name and information in the chat.
I did also add a resource that we created in Michigan. It's a little bit from the donor side of sort of options for your financial giving. So if you're doing individual giving, you want to give through DAF, you're interested in exploring what a foundation could mean, or equivalent information for corporations. I included that in the chat box.
Okay,
Excellent.
thank you. Julianne, why don't you carry on and go a little into more detail around community foundations?
Now, these I know like the back of my hand, so that's why I'm glad we have panelists who are experts in the other fields. So community foundations are 501c3 public charities. As I said in a previous slide, we are created specifically for the purpose of collecting a variety of different funds, pool them together, and get that money out into the community in grant making. We're our local philanthropy hub, and we are place-based, so we have a deep knowledge of community. When I say place-based, they can be town-specific. So in Illinois, we have Rock Island. As a community foundation, we have Moline, but then we also have Quad Cities. So all three of them serve the same geographic area. I am a single county community foundation, and our program director and I know every single nonprofit, every single one of them. We see each other at the grocery store. We see each other at meetings and things like that. So we know exactly who's doing what and what needs that they have. National Standards is a program created by the Council on Foundations. And in fact, I served on a revamp critique a couple of years ago. But anyway, how we do our grant making, how we invest our funds, et cetera. So many community foundations across the nation do comply with national standards. Many are in the process, and many of them are so incredibly new or small that they aren't quite there yet. We have 800 and some community foundations across the nation, and then we have about 40 in Illinois, and we have an Alliance of Illinois Community Foundations. And we get together 3 times a year, plus we have a listserv and things like that. So community foundations, or is that the next slide? Yeah, Holly, next, there we go. So all community foundations steward donor designed funds, not donor, but donor designed funds. We give grants to nonprofits, and we convene stakeholders around issues so that we know what's going on. So some of our funding is called responsive grant making, meaning people apply. So it's a competitive. Some of us take grant applications all year long until our budget is gone. Other people have cycles. The larger community foundations have cycles, and the larger ones have millions and millions and millions to grant out. And it's a competitive process. So you need to look at their website if you're in their geographic area and see what their grant cycle is. The grant applications are usually online, et cetera. Funds for strategic grant making. My community foundation is pretty good at this. Like I said, or like Holly said in our intro, our 2023 priorities are mental health and the out of school hours for children and families. So we are purposefully going out and meeting with nonprofits and government organizations to see who's doing what, because we want to fund it. And sometimes there isn't a nonprofit poised and ready to take our money and do a program or a project. So sometimes we do pilot projects here, and our program director runs them for a year or two until the other nonprofits see what we mean. And sometimes it's a pilot because you don't know if it's going to live forever. So at the end of it, you may go, that was fun, but it didn't work, that type of thing. Community foundations hold funds specifically for particular nonprofits. A donor can set up a fund at a community foundation for their favorite charity, and we will automatically send a grant check to that charity once a year, once a quarter, however the donor sets it up, and they can, what I would call, retire from advising the fund, especially as the people with wealth, the transfer of wealth study, and the greatest generation and the boomers were all retiring, et cetera. And we don't want to work anymore. So we set up a designated fund. Community foundations will also hold agency endowments for local nonprofits. We'll get into that a little bit more. So that's a service that we offer to local nonprofits. And then the individual donor funds, definitely donor advised funds are the absolute most popular. They're the most flexible. And it's a charitable giving tool, but it also has some tax benefits to it. So we can dig more into that. So donor advised funds, thank you. Explosive growth. And in fact, Edward Jones just announced in late 2022 that they are now going to start offering donor advised funds. So you can find donor advised funds at Merrill Lynch, Fidelity, Schwab, Edward Jones, and especially your local community foundation. Other organizations like Roses. So later in the panel, Rose is going to talk about how they administer their donor advised funds. The second bullet, managed by an investor in which a donor has to say. So from the community foundation world, many of us, when a donor advised fund comes in, my individual community foundation has 4 different investment portfolios, and we allow the donor to choose which of those investment portfolios they would like their money to go. So that's what we mean by the donor has a say. We don't allow them to come in and say, well, that's a 60-40 and I want a 50-50. Well, sorry, no, we offer a 60-40. The donor adds money to the donor advised fund. It can be a one lump sum. Maybe they have had a high income year. Maybe they have sold a business. Maybe they have inherited something, or they may put in a lump sum because of the charitable tax benefits affiliated with that, and the $24,000 couple threshold for charitable deductions, et cetera. They get to recommend grants out of that. And we use the word recommend because sometimes a community foundation will deny a grant from a donor advised fund because it might violate our 501c3. They may want it to go to a private citizen, which we cannot do. We can only give grants to nonprofits based in the United States, but Doctors Without Borders is based in the United States, but they operate overseas. We can give to the Red Cross that operates internationally. So different ways of doing that, lots of nuances that we try to talk through with the donor before they even set up their fund. DAFs are administered by a variety of investors. So we talked about that, Schwab, Fidelity, Edward Jones, et cetera. So many more people with wealth are choosing to set up a donor advised fund instead of starting their own private foundation. A private foundation, a colleague of mine used to say, rule of thumb was it's not worth it to have a private foundation under 5 million. Now they're saying 10 million. If you ever looked at the IRS rules of what you got to do when you have a private foundation, they're pretty daunting. So a community foundation or Rose's group, et cetera, can offer that family an alternative so that their passion can be spent on the grant making, not on filing IRS documents. And then privacy and payout considerations. Community foundations allow a donor to give their fund a kind of an anonymous name. Because if you've read the book of The Millionaire Next Door, there are plenty of people with wealth who don't want other people to know that they have it. And or my community foundation at least allows a grant from a donor advised fund to go out anonymously for that one particular grant if they so choose. And there's all sorts of reasons why they do it. Payout considerations. Holly, what exactly did you mean by that as far as donor advice funds, or?
Probably versus private foundations, maybe? Yes, is that, Holly?
Is that what you meant?
Yeah, and what we want to illustrate here is the difference between the large institutions like Charles Schwab that manage DAFs and the smaller local community-based ones that like community foundations that offer DAFs, and how money actually moves into and then out of DAFs into the community, and to what extent money stays in them versus going out, and how the nonprofits in the room can learn how to access the payouts. And I know we're going to dig into that more later in the program too, but the point we were trying to make is that 100% of the money that goes into DAFs doesn't necessarily go out immediately. So if you want to expound on that, you can.
Just that it's incredibly controversial. It depends on who you're talking to. If you follow a nonprofit advocate out of the Pacific Northwest by a gentleman named by the name of Vu Lei, he doesn't want any of that money held. I'm not going to say hoarded or anything like that, although it can. So anyway, yeah, if you're going to give money to a charitable organization, then let's get it out and useful in the community. And that's fine, but there are also donor advised funds and private foundations and stuff that they have their own reason for doing what they do. For the most part, community foundations do encourage our donors to get the money out. Sometimes the other feature that we offer, if your nonprofit is going to go through a capital campaign, maybe you want to set up a fund at the community foundation, and or we have donors who set up a donor advised fund because they know the church is going to build in 5 years. So they want their charitable tax receipt every year for 5 years while they donate to the idea. But if the church never builds, then they can redirect how that money is spent. So there are some donors who put money into a big donor advised fund because they have a purpose coming down the road in 5 or 10 years.
I'll actually clarify a couple things on the payout piece. First of all, the donor advised fund is strictly for charitable purposes. A donor, once it's there, it is legally not their money. They can recommend it, but they can't pull it back out and use it to buy a boat. It is exclusively for charitable purposes. So whether or not you have an endowed DAF, which we'll get into more, where it can sit there, maybe you sell a donor sells a business, it goes into a DAF and it sits there and it's building up some, but they're paying out. Those will have a likely lesser payout. In Michigan, we found those to be closer to in that 4 to 5%. So they resemble the private foundation. On the other hand, there are what are known as spendable DAFs, where someone puts money in maybe every year or so, and most of that money comes back out. Those have a payout rate closer to 21%, at least here in Michigan. So though all of that money does eventually come out, and there are a number of things going on in the field right now to ensure that the money is moving. Maybe not to the 100% level that some people want, but that money is moving. So that's, Rose, I think, looked like she was going to say something.
No, I was just going to say that when we look at our payout rate together, sorry, I lost my words there. When we look at our payout rate overall, we are somewhere in the range of 19 to 25% of our money that goes out the door. And we, and I'm sure other community foundations, et cetera, do have a rule that people have to give out at least a certain amount each year And we also have another rule that if no money goes out within 7 years, we're gonna tell them either use the money or we're gonna close this. So I think those kinds of rules also are good to counteract the policy proposals that are coming down of being much more rigid on how much money has to go out from donor advised funds.
I just want to pull Molly in because Chicago Community Trust is also the Chicago Community Foundation. My little old rural assets are 15 million and Molly's are in the B's billions. So we do things very, very similar, but yet we do things differently. I'm incredibly rural, she's incredibly urban. So Molly, what are your reflections on the past 10 minutes?
Thanks, Julie. I appreciate you bringing me in. I mean, everything that you've said is correct. I guess I would add the perspective from the trust that, you know, we were founded in 1915. And so we were the fourth community foundation created in the country. And we remain one of the largest. We do serve the Chicago region, so the city of Chicago and the collar counties. And, you know, as you mentioned, Julie, we have 4.3 billion in assets, about half of which is our endowment that provides funding for our discretionary grant making, our annual grant making that is all focused on our strategic plan to close the racial and ethnic wealth gap, as well as addressing critical needs in the community. Last year, we granted out over 65 million in the grants that Julie explained were that, you know, competitive nature where you go through the online grants management system to apply and so forth. I think I mentioned we have about 1,700 donor advised funds that we manage here, and we granted out over 1.5 billion last year through donor advised funds. And to the conversation about the payout rate, I would say that ours, I should have looked this up before this morning, but I believe our payout rate is about 23%. So it is well above the 5% required of private foundations. And, you know, to Rose's point, we also work very closely with our donors because we want them to be making grants out to the community on an annual basis. And if there is a period of time that goes by that a donor hasn't made a grant, we're definitely working with them to activate that donor advised fund.
And Molly, I would add that, you know, and Julianne, the three of us all work at true nonprofits, you know, whether they're community foundations or public charities. And we like to, at least we do, and I'm assuming you guys too, say that we are different from the financial institutions that host these in that we really, exactly what Molly just said, we really do want our donors to use their charitable dollars and go out the door. Unlike at financial institutions where actually I don't think there's much of a push to get people to give their money out, in that if it sits there, the financial institutions are making fees on that money. So I do think there's a distinction there, and I think it's important for people to know that.
And then lastly, for the nonprofits on the call today, how do I access these donor advised funds? Please reach out to your community foundation that serves your region. You can go to, somebody put, what's our Alliance website? Anyway, Alliance.
It's in the
ILC.
chat already.
Yep.
Yeah.
So find the community foundation near you. If you are still having problems, give me a call at mine. I will find it. Reach out to them and make sure that they fully understand what your nonprofit does, what your needs are. Ask them if you can apply for this competitive grants, but also ask them if there are any donor advised funds who might give a grant to your nonprofit, because that's an issue that that donor advised fund wants to cover. So we may not, probably won't give you the name, phone number, email of the holders of those donor advised funds, but we'll absolutely take your emails or paperwork or Facebook page or whatever and share it with the donor advised funds that we know are interested in your topic.
Julie, I'd like to add to that too, that as nonprofits think about donor advised funds, and they really are not as mysterious, at least I don't think they're as mysterious as people think they are. This is really a part of your individual giving program. A donor advised fund is a vehicle through which donors make grants to support nonprofit organizations. Sometimes they do it anonymously, and that makes it a little bit more challenging. But in my experience, most of the donors with whom I work are not making grants through their donor advised fund in an anonymous nature. So you know who they are, and you just cultivate them in the same way that you cultivate all of your other individual donors as a part of your fundraising program. And I will add to, Julie, to your point, you know, we do not, if an organization would like to share information with us so that we're aware of what the organization is doing and can be thinking about any of our donors that we know have an interest area in that sector or whatever, you know, we're always happy to take that information, learn about the organization, but we are not going to, you know, put donors in front of you. We're not going to open up any kind of grant. I'm losing words here, but like a competitive type of opportunity for donor advised funds. It's really just thinking about this as a vehicle through which individuals make grants, or corporations, I guess, and foundations make grants to organizations.
And we work similarly to Molly in that way. And I would also add that we are a little different from a community foundation in that we do not have a competitive grant making program. So our money out the door is totally from donor advised funds or some supporting foundations that we have.
And then last comment on anonymity. I'm in a handful of private Facebook groups with nonprofits, and many of them freak out saying, I have to send a tax receipt to this donor advised fund. No, you don't, because the donor who set up the donor advised fund at the community foundation, at Schwab, at Fidelity, et cetera, they already got their charitable tax receipt. So then they say, okay, but I have to find them so I can send them a thank you note. Well, they are anonymous on purpose for whatever reason they have, and we're not here to judge that, but they're already a follower of yours. If you get an anonymous grant from a donor advised fund, they already know who you are. They probably follow you on Facebook. They probably get your mailings. They might even serve on your board. They just want to be anonymous. So moral of the story there is, if it comes in anonymously, accept it and move on, because you don't need to be spending time worrying over it when you're probably not going to get an answer. So thank them publicly and move on.
Julie, if I may, I'd like to add to that with the trust, and I'm speaking just from the perspective of the Chicago Community Trust. Each of our donor advised funds has a philanthropic advisor, so somebody like me that works with the donor. And whenever whenever any grant goes out, there is a grant letter, and it has the signature of the philanthropic advisor that works with that donor. In the case where a grant is going out and it's completely anonymous, you don't know the name of the fund, you don't know the name of the donor, you do know the name of the philanthropic advisor, we are not going to give you any information about that donor. But if you reach out to us as staff, we are happy to share information with the donor. In some cases, they don't really want it, but if you'd like to send a thank you note or a stewardship report, or whatever you would like to do, we are happy to be that liaison with the anonymous donor so that you still are able to share some information with them and thank them.
Molly,
Correct.
I would
And
also,
yep.
I would
No,
also
Rose.
add that in our case, when people are not anonymous, the name and the address of the donor is actually on that letter.
Right.
So you can contact them. And I will say that for some reason, I get lots and lots of thank yous from organizations to which I have not given to, but I have signed that letter like Molly has signed her letter. So please, please, please do not read those letters carefully. We're giving you valuable information, and the donor's name is more likely than not on that letter.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. Thank you both, because neither of those technical points crossed my mind. And then I also want to thank Brittany, who put in the chat. Many of us have nonprofit wish list catalogs on our websites. There is a particular all-encompassing software that many of us community foundations use, and this is a function portal of this software, and I'm sure it exists in others. I just don't know about it because I don't use them. But anyway, so a nonprofit wish list catalog you might find on the website of a community foundation. The local nonprofits are invited to submit their funding needs, whether they need to buy a van for the food pantry, whether they need to add a staff for their domestic violence shelter, et cetera, et cetera. Then they put a dollar figure next to it. Then, like on a bridal shower registry, how much has been raised toward that project? The donor, anybody in the public can just click on that, make a donation of any amount of their choice using their credit card, debit card, and then we simply pass it through back to the nonprofit, and we don't charge them any fees for it or anything like that. But it kind of works like a bridal registry or a baby registry, where the nonprofits are, it's just one more service and method for the nonprofits of the region to tell their story of what they need and why they need it. And so thank you, Brittany, for pointing that out, because it had escaped my mind as well.
I'm gonna jump in and move us along, but before I do that, just wanted to summarize quickly how this recent conversation highlights the complexity of this issue and why nonprofits are confused about how donor advised funds work, how to benefit from them. That was the purpose of this event. So we understand this might still be a little confusing, but just to quickly summarize, the donor receives the tax benefit for their gift when they put money into a donor advised fund, which is why they don't need a receipt when you get your gift from the DAF at the nonprofit level, because they've already been given the receipt by the institution that is administering their donor advised fund. And that is what introduces the policy questions that we're going to go over in part 2. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that the question of when the tax benefit should be awarded is at the heart of those policy conversations. Should it be when the money goes into the DAF, or when it goes into the community institution that receives money from the DAF? And the time that elapses between those 2 points. And what we want to also emphasize is that the panelists in our panel today represent institutions that are close to their communities and are more mindful of those dynamics than maybe a large institution like Merrill Lynch would be. That's a for-profit institution that has a financial interest in not paying money out of DAFs. So those are all of the things that kind of are at the center of this policy debate. And we want to help make sure at Forefront that we're providing a table to discuss those issues and understand our stakeholders' perspectives, but also that we help coach nonprofits and learn how to benefit from these tools, which can provide benefits to our nonprofits. But because of the kind of opaqueness and confusion around them, not everybody knows how to get the money out of a DAF. And so I appreciate our panelists trying to, move folks in that direction. So just to underline this, if you're not sure what to do next, the best place to start is to build a relationship with your local community foundations or community foundation like institutions like JUF that can help, provide some information about how to find the right donors that might have DAF money that would help your causes and priorities. So we're going to transition now to endowments and talk about endowments. And before doing that, want to explain not all DAFs are endowed and not all endowments are DAFs. And so just to make sure we're clear on that as we move forward, because endowments have some different and unique considerations, but also provide a tool for nonprofit funding. So I'll hand it back to our panel now, starting with Julie, and then others, please chime in as you did before to go over how you manage endowments at your institutions.
An endowment is simply an internal policy that a nonprofit board adopts, where they take a portion of their money and set it aside in an account where the principal will never be used. It does get invested, and the nonprofit has access to the income off that endowment for operating. So any nonprofit can take $10,000 and walk down the street to any wealth manager and open up an account and let it ride, you know, that type of thing. Endowments are meant to be in perpetuity to provide future income. So if you are familiar with a personal IRA, an endowment is very similar. It operates exactly the same way as an endowment for a nonprofit. Institutional formula for calculating annual draw. We all do this differently. The majority of community foundations have a policy, a spending policy, where our endowments will pay out either 4%, 4.5%, or 5% on an annual basis. So if your nonprofit has your endowment housed at a community foundation, we will obviously tell you all of that stuff up front, send you consistent reports, whether it's annually, quarterly, whatever. And then you will know year to year what your income draw from that endowment is going to be. And then many of us community foundations don't take 1 year's worth to calculate that 4%. Many of us do what we call a 12-quarter or 16 or 20-quarter rolling average. So we take 12 quarters, we add that math, we divide it by 12 to get an average, and then we tell you the 4% of that. That's beneficial to a nonprofit because it balances out the highs and the lows in the market. So for example, at the end of 21, our 60/40 portfolio was up 13.2%. And then of course we ended December of 22 down 12 point whatever percent. So if I based your 4% nonprofit draw only on 2022 market, you wouldn't get any money. So if we look back 3 years, 4 years, 5 years and do an average, you're still going to be able to draw year to year, and it'll be a more consistent draw from year to year. They are managed by a variety of institutions. Again, it's an internal policy that your board decides to take. You can put it with your community foundation. Many, especially not small nonprofits, they don't want to manage their endowment. It's year to year, it's in perpetuity. One huge advantage of putting your endowment with a community foundation is that, you know, I've got 15 million in the market. Molly's got 3 point whatever billion. So you get the advantage of that pooled asset out in the market. And when I say out in the market, I don't mean everything's in stock. We all have portfolios that have a percentage of stock and a percentage of bonds and a percentage of cash, that type of stuff. So beyond that, that's the community foundation view on endowments. How about Rose? How do you guys do yours differently?
No, it's really very similar. We're not in the practice of managing endowments for just any agency that calls on us. We do those for agencies in the Jewish community. We have taken some other ones in the past, but I don't think we are doing that these days. We also hold endowments here at the Jewish Federation for programs and projects that our agencies do. So we have a number of agencies that are attached to us that we help support. So for instance, the Jewish Child and Family Services, which is one of the largest, family service agencies in the state, they may have specific programs. So we may hold not only their endowment, but endowments for specific programs they have or specific programs we have, et cetera. But exactly as Julie said, we do a 4% of a 16-quarter rolling average. We have an endowment portfolio, like Julie said, and also like Julie said, this is a much better way for smaller organizations who don't want that hassle, and it allows them a better return on their endowment because they're investing alongside many, many, many other dollars.
How about you, Molly?
I don't really have anything new to add to this, other than to say that our current spending policy is 4.5% of a 12-quarter rolling average. So that's really the difference. I mean, we also have agency endowments. We also have donor advised funds that are endowed, or, you know, sometimes people have a donor advised fund that they just sort of pretend is endowed, and they because they want it to grow over time, and so they utilize it in a way like it's endowed, even though it isn't. And so, yeah, I don't really have anything else to add to this.
I noticed Pamela, I'm sorry, Pamela, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Farrar's question, how to answer the following. How is the principal balance of an endowed fund protected? How often are investment committees reviewing their spending policy? You know, we're not a bank, so I can't say that we are protected in the same way that a bank would be. I will speak personally for the Jewish Federation's policy. We have what we call an outside investment office, which is a financial firm that works only in the nonprofit world and with large organizations that have large endowments, and they manage our portfolio for us day to day. But we have an investment committee that oversees the policy, and they meet, I'm not exactly sure, but they meet regularly to review that investment, how our investments are doing, to make sure they're doing well. I will also add that, probably similarly to Julie and Molly, our endowment is not designed to get the most money out of it. It's designed to grow in a way that may not be as high as the market goes, but then does not lose as much as the market does when there's a down market. So I know in 2022, we did quote very well because we only lost about 9.7% of our value. You know, whereas the market obviously was a lot, the 60-40 was lower and the market in general was lower. But again, we're also not going to get the highs that the market gets. And I'm assuming Julie and Molly have the same kind of endowment.
We have an,
No,
I
go
was
ahead.
gonna point out the important question in chat, which is basically looking for information about the advantages of building an endowment for a nonprofit at a bank versus one of your institutions. So I'm sure any of you might be eager to comment on that. So I just wanted to point that out.
So my snide comment is a community foundation is not out to make a profit. Our administrative fees on all of our donor funds, no matter what design they are pretty low. And not to throw the for-profit donor advised fund, Schwab's and Fidelity, not to throw them under the bus, but did I just say the word for-profit? And banks are the same. Banks fall in that for-profit category. To echo what Rose said earlier, community foundations try to not compete with local banks and stuff like that. We try to keep our service and our purpose incredibly narrow so that we don't compete. But at the same time, so here I am in rural Grundy County, and when we first started with our endowment investing, our board chair took our, RFP and went all over town, the different banks, the different wealth managers, et cetera. And it's not that they couldn't manage the endowment, the investments, they didn't have the software or the skill set to do the quarterly reporting for all of the donor funds that we hold. So we ended up with an investment firm out of the county. But the politics of that is we at least tried to do something locally. Back to Pamela's question, are they protected? The blunt answer is no. They are in the market. Now, we have a money market account at our bank. So if there's something happening that we can't risk, we will put it in the money market account, but only for the short term, not forever. If a nonprofit is that worried about it, then they can go buy a CD just like everybody else. So we are a service. We provide a variety of options. We are not for everybody, just like we're not for every single donor. ages ago, I used to get an annual phone call from one of the wealth managers in town, and he beat me up every year. And I said something to another wealth manager, and she goes, Julie, he doesn't have a charitable bone in his body. I'm like, thank you for that perspective, because I was stewing and fretting over how to persuade him that charitable giving is good. Well, it's not for some people. Endowments are not for some people. There are some people who think that every single dollar that's charitable needs to be out working in the community, and they have the right to that opinion and rock and roll. It just may not be at a community foundation type of thing. So as far as Shannon's question, always call your community foundation. I don't care what the topic is, always call us. If we're not a good fit for you, that's fine. And we appreciate that. But, you know, we have our services and we have specific parameters, and if they don't work for you, but always call us. We're always happy to help.
So I want to make sure we have time to cover the study and take additional questions. So let's transition to any follow-up on DAFs and endowments and how they can benefit the nonprofits that are here or that watch this recording later. So somebody earlier asked about how DAFs do or do not fund general operations, and that same question can apply to endowments, where endowments can become a source of unrestricted annual funding to your nonprofit if you build them. And so I just want to underline that as well, that both tools, both DAFs and endowments, can provide sources of funding for your general operations, for capital projects, and for your programs. And so I just want to ask our panel to, and even other community foundations that are in the room today, if you want to illustrate how that's happening in your community and how nonprofits are benefiting directly from these products. I want to focus our final discussion on that. And if anybody in the room has questions about that specifically, and then we're going to hand it to Brittany to go over the national study that's underway and invite folks to participate in that.
The Community Foundation of Grundy County's annual budget is 45% funded by our endowment. And for a small nonprofit, that would be 45% of permanent annual income that isn't a golf event, which isn't a gala, which isn't a mailing, anything like that. So that's me. How about Molly? Do you know?
Our annual, I actually am not entirely sure what our annual operating budget is, but I can say that it is 100% covered by our endowment.
Oh, cool.
Ours is not, but I will say we have two different sort of large endowments. One are from what we call annual campaign endowments. So those, when people pass away, they may leave us money to pay their annual campaign gift for the rest in perpetuity. And then we also have a general endowment. And I think all told, for us, it's not a huge amount of money because we're pretty large, not as large as the Chicago Community Trust, but I think all told, those campaign continuity funds and our general endowment pay out somewhere in the range of 14 to 15 million a year.
So can you specifically advise nonprofits here how they could build an endowment at a community foundation to fund their general operations?
Well, funny you should mention it, because that was going to be my last comment. Community foundations, JUF, we all are very good at major gifts, planned giving, and non-cash assets. So for my community foundation, we will accept and hold and never sell farmland. And the net income of the grain sales from that particular farm is what available for grant making to that donor advice fund or that field of interest fund or whatever. Charitable gift annuities, gifts of stock, qualified charitable distributions from IRAs, estates, etc., closely held business interests, all that. All of us here on the panel are very good at doing that. So if your nonprofit has a fund at the community foundation, you simply have to be out marketing why people should donate to your nonprofit and support your cause, and then send them to us for the technical advising on which assets to donate and how they can do it. So that's my pitch. How about Molly? You guys are probably much even bigger and better at complex gifts than I am.
We can definitely, I mean, we have a gift planning department, so we can handle just about any kind of gift. Except I don't think anybody likes timeshares, so we won't go there.
Except for staff retreats, right? We'll use the Florida condo for a staff retreat.
But nonprofits can work with a community foundation like the trust or any other community foundation to set up an endowment for and have it managed. As we've already talked about, those are called agency funds. I guess I'm honestly not sure how to answer this question in the most helpful way, but you certainly can come to the trust and talk with us about what you're looking to do and how we might be of assistance.
That's what I wanted to highlight. Step one is contact your local community foundation and explore the options. So any questions on this piece before we transition to the national study from anyone in the room? There's a question in chat about donating stock or property.
The short answer to Shannon's question is we are not out to compete with the banks and others. So for me to accept stock on your behalf and sell it on your behalf and cut you a check on your behalf, that puts me in direct competition with other organizations in the community like banks and trust officers and stuff like that. So we would not do it as a pass-through. We would do it to put into your agency endowment at the community foundation.
Or a donor advised fund even. So you could
Exactly.
theoretically, if it's easier for you, this is what I was going to say, you open a donor advised fund, you start trying to raise money for an endowment. In the meantime, you put it in a donor advised fund. And if people do want to donate those kinds of things, they can donate it to the donor advised fund. And then perhaps you can convert it to an endowment also.
Correct. So Rose makes an excellent point. Any fund can be a non-endowed spendable, like Molly was talking about. Someday it can become an endowment, but you can't go the other way. An endowment, once it becomes an endowment, is an endowment forever.
Yeah, and the purpose of that is because endowments are intended to exist in perpetuity. That's why they exist. So it is important not to type all of your resources in an endowment if you need some cash flow. So I'm going to hand it to Brittany. We want to talk about this important opportunity. So Brittany, would you like to summarize this research and how it will be used and how folks can engage? There are quite a few community foundations in the room today, so they in particular should be listening at this moment.
Thanks, Holly. That sort of took off my plate of the community foundations. Please wake up at this point in the presentation, because this is really for you. It's for the Jewish federations. It's for any DAF providing organization that is working in the field. I am one of 4 researchers with the Donor Advised for the Research Collaborative. We are teaming up with a number of the top industry leaders, COF, United Philanthropy Forum. If you've thought of it, they're probably already working with us on this project. This is the largest study on DAFs ever conducted. It's intended to ensure accurate and reliable information about DAFs for the entire sector, especially as we're seeing increased public policy conversations. And personally, as someone who gets to field a lot of media calls about this, the more information we have, the better. All costs associated with this project are covered by a generous grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So this is free for people or organizations, I should say, to participate. And as I said, it's a nationally recognized team of DAF researchers. The 4 of us are sort of the names in this field. And with this grant, we're able to kind of combine into this super team, as we've affectionately called it, of researchers who work in this space. We anticipate the results of this study will be available at the end of this year or early 2024 via a national report. We know we'll be doing numerous webinars nationally, potentially regionally, and taking that presentation to a number of venues across the field. We're also looking at benchmarking opportunities for participants. For example, Forefront actually could commission us to run a benchmarking report for all Illinois community foundations if that was of interest. So that is sort of an example of we will finally have enough data, we can break it down, and that will be vital information for Holly and her team if they decided they wanted to take that data as facts that are going to Foundation on the Hill. They would finally have the data to be able to do that. So that's really, really beneficial for all of you. Our participants are not only community foundations, but also national DAF sponsors, both commercially affiliated and non-commercially affiliated. Some names you've heard of, some names you have no idea, but do a lot of the behind the scenes work in this space. And then also a number of religiously affiliated DAF sponsors, just like Rose's organization. We are seeking to recruit over 100,000 accounts across the country. So we're looking for 80 to 100 providers. Everything from the largest organizations in the space to the smallest are eligible to participate. We are asking for them to share. We actually have data collection webinars that just talk about what's the ask, what kind of data are we asking you to pull out of your system, but it's de-identified, anonymized, so no donor data is coming to us. Transaction level data for 2014 to 2022. We're also flexible on those dates because we know just about everybody's had a data conversion at some point behind the scenes. All of that data will be securely stored in the Giving Tuesday data commons. So it's only the research team, we're only seeing parts of it, and it becomes increasingly anonymized the further through the project we get. This data will align with a manager survey and a donor survey that we are also running. So all of these are designed to really give the field for the very first time a very thorough understanding of DAFs and how do they work. So to learn more, you are welcome to visit the dafresearchcollaborative.org website with tons of information about the study and how to participate. We're also running webinars. It feels like every week. I think I've got another one. We just did one yesterday. We've got others next week, and they're just all the way through the next couple months talking about the study. We actually have an hour webinar that we typically run that's just more information, the super long version of these last couple of slides. And we also have data collection webinars that are just what's that ask, which is great for your finance or database teams. You're welcome to email me with questions. I'm happy to chat. We also have a commitment form. At this point, we're asking organizations who are interested to fill that form out, which is just some generic contact information, by March 31st. And I've already sent Holly a number of resources, just some basic information about the study and how you can learn more. So that is, in a nutshell, the National Study on Donor Advised Funds. And we'll be looking forward to finally sharing the results of that in the coming year. But first, we need organizations to sign up.
Any questions for Brittany? The document she mentioned is in chat. And I also just want to draw your attention to some Q&A that's happening in chat as well. Thanks for working on that, Julie, in the background. Okay, well, if there's no other questions for Brittany, I do want to encourage folks to participate, especially since Illinois uniquely has such a huge range of DAF managing institutions from very small to very large. I think our state has a unique position and ability to contribute to this research, and there will be a policy response. So it is very important that Illinois voices are heard. So I just want to encourage you all to take a look and consider participating, and let us know if Forefront can be supportive in some other way with any follow-up on this question. So we're going to start to wrap up. I'm going to ask my colleagues to we have a short evaluation I'd ask that you complete before you leave today. I know we may start to lose people, so if we could share that now, that would be helpful. And as far as next steps go, we just want to quickly go over a few related opportunities and kind of give you a feel for how to move forward from here. So we've gone over the basics around DAFs and endowments and what to do first if you don't have one and you're interested in exploring those options. So I just want to ask for any final comments from our panelists on any other suggested next steps. And if you would, for example, have specific recommendations, like is a minimum deposit required in order to open an endowment, or things like that, that might just provide some high level technical assistance for people that want to take the next step.
I don't, I've talked a lot. So, but by all means, if anybody has any question anywhere, I don't care where you are in the world, if you have a question, shoot me an email or give me a call.
And same for me, I'm happy to chat. And I do think we generally have 100,000 for an endowment, although that may be going up.
Okay, and that will vary across the state at different institutions. So if that sounds high to you, don't be discouraged. There's probably a lower threshold somewhere else. I did just put a couple links in chat about how to start an endowment and how to leverage DAFs from Candid. Those might be helpful as you move forward as well. So I did want to quickly draw your attention to another opportunity that recently came out of Congress. So it passed in the omnibus budget package in December. And I know folks are just starting to get their heads around this, but what happened essentially was that that Congress expanded the IRA charitable rollover. So for the first time, it will be indexed to inflation, which means that the cap will start going up year over year, starting next calendar year. And then they also provided a new tool to allow seniors beginning at age 70 and a half to start contributing up to $50,000 from their traditional IRAs to products like a charitable gift annuity, a charitable remainder annuity trust, or charitable remainder uni trust. And so these are other things you can be talking to your local community foundations about and making sure your development team is aware of, as this type of giving is among the fastest growing in the country in the field of philanthropy, particularly with so many baby boomers retiring and starting to move assets around. So if you have questions on this quickly, we can take them. I don't want to belabor it because it's kind of complicated and new issue, but I'm adding some links in chat that you can explore and give to your development folks. Any comments from the panel on these?
Except that there's so much money in IRAs. I mean, we have a number of donors who are taking advantage of this and sending $100,000 per spouse to a fund that they have designed at the community foundation. And then as far as charitable gift annuities, Russell James out of Texas does a lot of data. Every 5 years, he does a survey of charitable gift annuities. Who's doing them? How old are they? How much is the amount of money that they put in? And the majority of charitable gift annuities are elderly women who are widowed, and they put in like $50,000. So for those of you who think that you operate in a community where there's not a lot of wealth, there are a lot of elderly women who have 50,000 who would put money into a charitable gift annuity. They would get annual income off of it, and then when they die, your charity gets the balance. So just another tool that doesn't take an extreme amount of wealth for your donor to get into.
But just caution, you notice the donor advised funds are not on there. So you
Thank
cannot
you.
use that IRA charitable rollover for a donor advised fund. So when Julie says a fund, it can't be a donor advised fund. It could be an endowment.
Correct.
Thank you for that distinction. So just start poking around on that if that sounds interesting to you. It's new, so we wanted to make sure it's on your radar, especially as your policy team, that we're passing along information like that can support your development. As we wrap up here, we wanted to mention a couple other things coming up. The deadline for community foundations and other foundations in Illinois to sign up for FOTH is Friday, and there's still time and room for you all to join us in DC. It's always really fun. The picture in your screen here is from a virtual meeting with Darren LaHood last year during FOTH. Of course, this year it will be in person in DC, which is exciting. And I also want to, those of you that are in Central Illinois, Darren LaHood's a very key person to think about talking to on all these issues going forward. He serves on the Ways and Means Committee, which oversees all of these charitable tax issues, and he's now in the majority. So I just wanted to flag that he's a key person in Congress, really nationally, at this stage and with this Congress. So if you have relationships with him, you want to strengthen those during the next couple of years. And we can talk more about how to do that if you're interested. FOF is an event where foundations from all over the United States convene for a Hill Day. So we'll be attending with colleagues from all over the country, from other philanthropy serving organizations and the foundations they represent. So it's a great chance to network with foundations from across the United States and the policy teams from across the United States that are working on these issues. If you're not familiar with it and you can't go this year, just please watch it for next year and plan to join us next year. It's really fun and a really great chance to educate your Congress, about our congressional officials about what you're doing and the good work you're doing in your communities. We also have a couple events coming up, the links in chat to our events page. So we're going to do a budget webinar in March in conjunction with the Responsible Budget Coalition and probably League of Women Voters to talk about how to get more involved in state budget advocacy. And there's other events like that coming down the pike that you may want to watch, including part 2 of this event. We don't have a date for that yet, but if you're signed up for our communications, you'll see that opportunity. It will probably be in May or June. We're just trying to get that calendared with our panelists that we have slated for that at this time. Almost done here. So I mentioned part 2. At part 2 of this event, we're going to dig into our Endow Illinois tax credit proposal at the state level, which would support your ability to build endowments in the state, and donors would receive a tax benefit for that should lure additional giving. We can also debrief what happens at FOF and what might be coming in terms of federal regulations on DAFs, which we anticipate in the next couple of years, if not sooner, and so on. So we just encourage you to come back for part 2. For that one, you may want to send your policy people and they can debrief with you afterwards if you're not the policy person at your organization and you have someone that might be the right person for this next piece. If you need pointers on how to follow Forefront's work, those are here. Our weekly emails, well, we only do them weekly. You won't get too much. You won't get them every day, but that's where you can follow all the events we're doing. And have summary information about the policy work, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, of course. Our Action Center is where you'll get information about calls to action around the bills we're working on at the federal or state level. The QR code on your screen there, if you scan that, it'll take you right to the Action Center. You can sign up. So if you actually want to engage on the bills we're working on, that's how to do it. That's where you're going to find out if there's a hearing or a vote and we need you to contact your legislators. And remember, when you do that, when you respond to our call to action as Forefront, you do not have to register as a lobbyist. You can engage freely in those calls to action because you're protected in doing that kind of grassroots advocacy through us, so Forefront is a registered lobbying entity, and Alec and I are registered. So you can freely engage in those kind of calls to action without being a registered lobbyist, no concern. So we have I again want to call your attention to the evaluation chat. You'll have to scroll up a little, but please do that before you go. So at this time, we can take any final questions or comments from anybody on anything, including our panelists or folks in the room that have any wrap up before we leave. Any final questions? Hearing none, I will offer an enormous thank you to our panel and round of applause. Thank you very, very much for your time and expertise. And if you have ideas about how to follow up on this event or other ideas about programs that would be helpful to you from the policy team at Forefront, please don't hesitate to share them with me or Alec. We are here for you. We want to continue designing policy-focused programs that are of most interest and most helpful to our stakeholders, regardless of your membership status. So please know that our job literally is to represent you at all levels of government, and we're here for you for anything. And we just really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you very, very much. Have a wonderful, hopefully long weekend ahead for all of you.